Okay. You want to tell us a little about your before uh, your knee broke? What kind of family life did you have, or what is your background? Like, what was the
Yeah.
secure, quote unquote, secure position that you came from before your life became what it is?
Well, good question.
Oh, it just occurred to me. I didn't have a question.
I have to think. I had a challenging time around my teenage life, around my about 13, 14, at home, in the home life. We had a good home. My father was a builder, my mother was a teacher, normal kind of a situation, comfortable, middle class, I guess, life. And then around that time, my father had a brain disease, a very rare brain disease, over a few years, until no one knew that we all thought he was having a nervous breakdown. And then he had, had to be rushed to hospital and couldn't pronounce his words and was kind of speaking another language. And then he got airlifted to the next city, and he was in a special unit for 8 weeks with different doctors studying his case, and was pretty much overnight. And my mum was his secretary. And so it was a family business. And so overnight that all kind of got tipped upside down, I guess. And my role, or what I thought my purpose was, I was sure that my purpose was to be the emotional support for my parents, and mainly my parents, I think, and the family. And because of perhaps my character, I was the one that went to the hospital. I happened to be running a race, like in an athletics thing, where I was getting a bus to the capital city, which happened to be the day that my father had been airlifted over the next day. And so there I was as a young girl, 13 and a half, 14, and I had to get a bus by myself to the Royal, the hospital, and find my parents in their ward after my race. And both of them were crying, and it was just like, and then from that moment onwards, I kind of was like the mother of the family in a weird way. And so financially and materially, there was some, we were fairly secure, everything was okay. My father was put on a kind of a permanent disability pension. Most people that have what he had end up being vegetables, or completely kind of disabled. It's frontal lobal damage, so social people visiting was awkward because he would say inappropriate things, and we were teenagers, and my mum resented him because
Support system was gone.
Exactly, and she had to find a job. All the pieces were perfectly in place, though, as you said, and she ended up getting a job in the prison, in a men's prison and protection prison, as the education coordinator, which was a huge, stressful jump for her. And she was in that position for 17 years, and incredible life lessons and incredible experience for her. My father made a full recovery, by the way. It was like kind of a incredible, which also pushed me into, anyway, so getting back to answering the question, because I can go off on a tangent, but at that time, I won a bizarre scholarship, because I'm from rural, like regional South Australia. And at that time, there was a political, some political alliance between Australia and Indonesia, and they just pumped out this exchange program. It was a pilot course, the rural, we never got, you know, usually it was just in the capital cities. And somehow I won this bizarre scholarship. It was just like handed out we learn Indonesian in Australia at that time. It was just standard. And they just handed out a piece of paper and filled it in, didn't think anything of it. And it was right at that time when what was secure for me fell apart at home. And then I won this scholarship and I lived in Indonesia for 6 months. So you could say that some seed kind of began then, you know, and there I was going to the family I lived with, the parents, the father was Hindu and his mother and the son were Hindu, and his wife was high Javanese. He was Balinese, she was Javanese, and she was Muslim, and the daughter was Muslim, and the guy that lived up on the roof was Buddhist. And all of them took me to the temples and their practices, and I just went out. Everyone just took me everywhere, and that was when I was 14. And so then I never. What was security for me, the base that I came from was an emotional security, and then that dynamic changed when that situation changed in my family, and I took on a lot of emotional weight, and then I no longer found that same sense of security there. I felt actually like I needed to cut everything, and that's where that that I needed to just cut off from everything and everybody, because I had an issue with putting limits in place, and that's where that kind of all stemmed from, I think.
I've been told often by a couple of my filmmaker friends that they would want to do a story on my life. I think your life is far more fascinating, and I'll definitely give them this idea that they should look you up.
No. There's way more interesting people than me, definitely.
Yeah. So, in fact, the question that arose was very beautiful, and it all seems interconnected. The way all the questions seem to be falling in place was because before this, you did mention that you allow things to be, or you're secure when they are not too secure, or your ideas of security have changed and you're no longer looking for that. Now, a 13, 14-year-old girl re-looking at, because you used the term normal, and after that line, I think everything else you spoke was abnormal in the conventional sense, because everything that you had to take up and what happened to you, whether good or bad, even the scholarship, if it's good, then if the other learnings are good, then there are some other things that are challenging. So do you think, there are actually two questions I have. One question is, do you think that the journey is actually from security on a human level? I want you to personalize this whole thing with the life experience that all of us share. Is the acceptance of insecurity as the base of our understanding? Is that a better way to look at things? Like, I have a teen daughter. I often talk to her, and whenever things go wrong, I keep telling her that, look, it's good that they are going wrong. So now you know that this doesn't work the way it works. Let's just stay with it. We don't need to. In fact, the earlier podcast, just the one prior to this, the male guest landed up saying something called compassionate communication, which struck me very, very deeply, because he said all you need to do is listen. And then he used another line which says you don't even need to encourage. Just listen. And sometimes that is enough. And I want to now change the context to listen to life. What is it telling us about ourselves? We are very fascinated by this story. Why me? Is a big deal, I think, across cultures, across languages. Why this is happening to me, and why not something better, or my idea of life? Why can't it be simpler or happier, or whatever else that we look for? Do you think there is wisdom in that? That is one question. The second question I have is, what do you think about yourself when you can distance yourself from yourself? Because it is so intense, it needs a perspective which is not you. Because if it is you, then this why me is very loaded. So these are in a way interconnected questions. Feel free to answer the way you want. I'm just throwing a point of view.
I think just straight off the bat with the second question, that perspective for me, I'm like a sponge, and so I find myself quite affected by the environment I'm in and by the people I talk to and by others' opinions about me and my life, I guess, because it is different. And so more and more, almost in the opposite way to what you say, I feel it's more like I have to, not have to, find this balance between working out what is the projection of those who are around me about their concept of security and how that relates to what my lifestyle generates, and understand that and come back to actually a security that I do have inside, that the pieces are in place. And that's a deep listening to something, something that's not outside. That's not outside of me. That's not external, because I tend to. We tend to, or I definitely have tended to look for the reflection and the am I doing okay? Am I doing it right? Is everything, I'm looking for reassurance outside of myself, a reflection somehow to say, yeah, you're on the right track, or it doesn't matter that you're doing it this way, or, and that's something that I'm learning to stop outsourcing and to actually insource, I guess. And then, and then there is a sense of security that comes with that. And then the other aspect is trusting life, trusting for me, the way I see it and the way I express it is in trusting that that somehow there is once the eyes are a little bit open, even if you want to close them, you can't, even if you want to walk back in the other direction, you can't, and trusting in that process of letting go of so much effort and so much, being in that place constantly of kind of, I don't know what the term is, but
I guess it's called living.
Living, dancing, yeah, with a one step forward, one step back, and but and the first question, which was, just remind me of the first one again.
I'm saying, in fact, you've answered that, so I want to now build up on what you've said. It's fairly interesting. If on a larger scale, we are talking about, like I just set the context of from security to insecurity is the journey, which incidentally was the first question. I want to now actually zone in a little more because of the answer that you gave right now. Effectively, you're saying in the moment, how are you perceiving things seems to change. So I'll give you an example. While you were speaking, at some point, I have another podcast planned out. For one small millisecond, I looked at the time and I said, oh, I got to do that. That was one thought. And then I said, are you here? And I quickly came back. Why am I setting this context? Because effectively, this is living. Learning to come back to the present moment and living it as fully as you can. And one of the tricks is, because I find a lot of friends who I share this with who are not too judgmental about themselves or others. They don't forgive themselves for these kind of transgressions. Whereas you and I would say, okay, it's okay. Just come back. In our practice, we realize you don't even have to say just come back. The moment you realize you're gone, you are back actually.
You're back.
Because it's fairly in the moment. So are you really saying, because you did say, I don't know what to call the process, and in jest I called it living. But living is only in the moment. No, it cannot be lived in fantasy about the future or any thought about the past. However dramatic, however big, however life-changing that those lessons may have been, in the moment, you are just you, and you are as vulnerable as you were earlier or as you will be in the future, because you really do not know. It's always unknown.
Exactly.
And you have to learn coming back to living. So do you think it's a practice of sorts to train the mind with our experiences and try and balance it with understanding, wisdom, kindness, compassion, those values that we look for from others? Am I all right? You said you're always trying to get it from someone. That, oh, did I do this right? But shouldn't we first do it with ourselves, saying, okay, it's okay, just wait?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's okay to say that. Definitely. I think when you enter into the terrain of the tricky mind, then there arises, in my case, the doubt where many actions and many actions and tendencies on my part, which would seem positive, to the outside eye, then I've come to question and come to kind of dissect, I guess, or go deeper into what interest is behind and from where they spring, and just observe, I guess. So I guess that's where that comes from, I think. So I think I trust my own perception less in many ways, and so I see how that can just flip around like a floundering fish, and so I trust that less. In a way.
Yeah, I think that's you answered the question that we both were struggling with before this one. The first part of the question was actually, how do you let go? Now that I have a simpler way to question it, if the question would have been, how do you let go of this self-obsessive perception that we seem to have of things? And obviously, because this body is our tool, and it does get affected by a lot of things: the environment, physical environment, mental states of mind. I like this non-doership answer. It kind of brings it to a place where I think I want to end and ask people to contemplate a lot more on the aspect of, if one observes what happens to their version of the story. Something that is not talked often enough is given a very sacred space, again, in meditative courses, and or else we try and either blame it on God or try and seek favor, but actually just observation, which is a very human tendency, if allowed to be natural. We would perhaps arrive at a wisdom which is beyond us, perhaps. That is something that I would want to think on a little more. But before I do the thinking, I want to thank you for joining me at such a short notice, and this has been an extremely provocative kind of talk. I am so fascinated by your story, and it seems there are layers and layers which are just life. Just because they are dramatic, they just come forward in a far more stronger way. but it is just life actually.
It is life, and I think the more, and probably in your experience also, and obviously, thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad that I'm glad that I showed up. That the more you talk with people, you know, the more everyone is fascinating. You know, everyone is.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
So fascinating, and it because life is fascinating, and
Yeah.
it's what you can learn from one person with.
I'm losing your connection, so I missed the last couple of lines you said.
Going beyond, you know, going beyond the perception and the judgment, and yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I missed the last couple of lines because I think the internet got stuck at some place.
Oh.
So I would want to let it stay there because it's a life lesson in itself to accept even this. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
I'll see you around.
See you around.